Welcome to Module 14, or jumping into photography, one of the most essential parts of your short-term rental business. First, that disclosure: not a licensed attorney, accountant, photographer, financial advisor, or any other licensed individual. I'm a student just like you, sharing my experiences. I'm just a little bit further down the road, and I want to be able to share that value with you. So let's jump into it. Photography. So important. It's honestly the number one thing affecting your profits. Pricing is probably tied, it's probably 2, maybe 1.5. But professional photography, it's your calling card. You should get professional photography for your unit. Real estate photography is an interesting world. In my area specifically, it runs about 11 cents per square foot. If you're looking for a rough estimate, across the U.S., I'm sure that varies widely. I would assume that urban areas and very rural areas probably have higher costs, whereas as you sit in the middle is probably when that cost is going to lower. If you have a friend with a nice camera, that does not mean that they are a real estate photographer. And not all real estate photographers can do a good job photographing short-term rental units. There are certain things that statistically do very well and certain things that statistically do very poorly. All of your photos should be very light and bright. They should be shot in daylight. I'm going to get into a little bit of photography jargon. I'm not a photographer. I cannot work a camera very well. But I have done this long enough that I know what to tell my photographer. And that's the situation that you need to be in. Aces in their places. Trust your photographer to do his job or her job. But you need to be able to tell them what you want so you can get a product that you can use to market and increase your profits. So, photographs should be light and bright. And I'll show you photo examples. You can take screenshots of them. You can show your photographer. You can get on Airbnb, see the listings they're booking extremely well, and show them those, tell them that's what you want. Your photographer should always, these are things you need to ask them before they come out. Screenshot it, email it to them, doesn't have to take a lot of your time. Shoot on a tripod. If they're not shooting on a tripod, you don't need it. They should shoot from waist height. This might vary a little bit in rooms that have vaulted ceilings, but generally no. This, you might ask why, that's super weird. So when you're photographing rooms, the best way to do so is actually shorter than the average human. So average human, I don't know the exact height, probably between 5 and 6 feet, and you want to be below that. Also, if you have an 8-foot ceiling, you want to be about halfway in between your ceiling and your floor to be able to accurately capture the environment of the entire room. Not necessarily saying that if you have a 10-foot or 20-foot ceiling, you need to be at that level. You should always be shooting about 4 feet off the ground-ish. It's also the height in which furniture is best highlighted. It's how tall you are when you're sitting down. There's lots of psychology for it, but I'll show you some examples of things that were shot too high and too low. Your photographer should bring lighting for basements and dark rooms. If you have a house full of windows, fine, no lighting. But I would always just ask your photographer to bring lighting so you're prepared. They don't have to come back, they don't have to reshoot, they have that lighting with them. Basements and dark rooms are really hard to get lighting right, so be patient with your photographer. It might take longer than usual. They might even charge a little bit more, but it's worth every penny. Lighting, they might bring in like big box lights. Shooting with a flash can be helpful, but most often they should bring like external lighting. They plug into a plug, not just a flash. You should always schedule your photography shoots between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. And this is why. So if it's the position of the sun. So if you're in Alaska, I guess it could be wrong. But having the sun high in the sky creates the most reflection onto the ground and areas around your windows to bring the most natural lighting in your windows for the brightest room, which is less editing, looks more natural, looks more like it's going to be when the guest arrives. It's its best version between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. So always schedule your shoots during that time. You have to get off work, do it, go at lunch. It makes a huge difference. And even photographers don't necessarily know that one. More on photography. Okay, we're going to show some pictures here. So this is on the Airbnb site. Most specifically, your first view of the property. When you get on the site, you click on that listing, this is what you see. And these are some examples of photos, and I want to show you good and bad things. So top right, you can see from the windows that they did not shoot this between the hours of 11 and 3. Or it's a very dark basement window well. And in that example, they should have brought some additional lights because there's too many shadows. Dark in photos is often construed as dirty, which is unfortunate because it's just the photography, but it's just what we think psychologically. That top left and bottom right feel very clean. They feel inviting. They're shot from the right height. So if you notice the bottom right, you're looking at the couch, that's shot at that 4-foot height that you want to shoot your pictures at. You want your photographer to shoot from that height. You can see in that top right how we're looking down on the bed. That's shot from somebody just standing there or with a tripod, I'm not sure, at the natural height of your face where you're shooting the picture. But really being able to put yourself into the room, professional photography is taken much lower, like that example in the bottom right. Also, you have to think about the listing platform. So Airbnb cuts off, see how some of these pictures are cut off right in the middle? The cover photo, which is the most important one that you see when you're searching through, gets cut in half by about a third is cut off the bottom. So that makes the bottom left look confusing, right? That's just floating pillows. Also, the bottom left, that yellow tone on the walls, and that can either be changed by lighting or in post. Post meaning after the photos are taken, to edit that and make it, that should be crisp white like in the top left and bottom right. A little bit variation, shadows are fine, but those are the things that you're going to want to explain. Screenshot this slide, send it to your photographer. Those are the things that you're going to want to stand out to your photographer when they are shooting your unit. This is what you want to tell them. As far as I have gotten questions, lights on, lights off. If you have a really dark room, you're bringing in lighting to light it, you're welcome to have the lights on, top right. You're a good photographer will know a better way to do it than in the top right. It'll look better than that, but it can be done well. Okay, as far as stats on how much photos help you, here are the highlights you need to know. There's a really good article, not being sponsored, but HireBookings.com put out a really great article a couple years ago about photos. Airbnb used to have this thing called verified photos where they would come in and make sure the photos were actually of your property, but they stopped kind of having those issues. So they don't do that anymore. So now verified photos you can think of as just like professional photography. So they did a study of 13,000 listings for a year and a half, I believe, in 7 major U.S. cities, which ended up being 510,000 photos that they monitored. And the owners with professional photography made about $2,500 more a year. When you think of professional photography being 11 cents a square foot, so it's safe to assume that's anywhere between $200 and maybe a max big house $700 of photography of photos that you can use year after year because you put really sustainable supplies in your units. I mean, that more than pays for itself.
Yeah, that's an extra month of cash flow every single year because of one good choice, right?
One good choice. And it's going to make your life easier. It really is. Guests will have less questions about this or that because they'll be able to see it in the photos. So this is a great one if you're looking for real deep research. Okay, this is kind of my good and bad example that I got going for you here. Diagonal shots of beds get more bookings than straight on because it tricks your eye. So if something isn't perfect, but it's taken a diagonal, your brain just gets confused. And you don't really know, is the camera perfectly level, up, down, whatever. But if you have something that's perfectly squared up, but because of the perspective in a room, things look smaller in the back and bigger in the front, which makes the lines crooked, if you will. And if that didn't make sense to you, just don't take straight on shots, especially of beds. take diagonal shots of beds. They're more forgiving. Take pictures of the insides of your cabinets because it shows your kitchen supplies. And this is something that a lot of hosts aren't doing. Do not show photos of the outside of your property before your guests have booked. If they want to see the outside of it, I understand that. They want to know what they're getting. They want to know what they're booking. But frankly, it's a security concern if they know what the house looks like and the general area it is and they haven't booked it. So I just would never show photos of the outside of your listing before the guests have booked. And you can, if you explain that to them nicely and as a security risk, in my experience, every time they've understood. This is a fairly technical tip, but if you want it, great. Light low in the room if you're bringing in exterior lighting. That example is shown fairly well in this photo here, the photo comparison. If you look at the table legs on the left underneath the furniture there's still a shadow. It's still natural. It wasn't photoshopped out, but it's very much well lit underneath the table, which makes it look clean. On the right, darker overall, but there's no additional lighting underneath that table. And the lighting here is not coming from an external like box light or lighting that was brought in. It's just coming from that window. But showing underneath that is much cleaner. And
it almost makes it look cluttered, even though it's the exact same scenario. It almost makes that desk area look more cluttered than in the better lit photo.
Yes. So, and in the back, in this example on the right, the differences are, I know it's like spot the difference again. The light bulbs in this unit are soft white, which I prefer personally. Everyone has their preference for light bulbs. For photography, daylight is always easier to shoot, but you can change it after. So the right picture to the left picture, we didn't change the light bulbs. That's done in Photoshop. So ask your Photoshop people to make it look white. This is an example of shooting between 11 and 3. The photo on the right was shot at 9 a.m. And you can see that blue morning light through the window. The photo on the left was shot midday about 12 or 1. And you can see the light difference of what's coming in. And that makes a massive difference in your photos. Other differences, just having the blinds open versus shut. If you're photographing a house, if your photographer is there, be there with them. Ensure they open all the windows. Tell them that ahead of time. Sorry, all of like the blinds, screens, curtains. You don't actually need to like have fresh air. It's just the light you're worried about. If they have tints, open the tints. So those are kind of some technical tips for getting really good photos. And I would even argue that photo on the left isn't perfect. And you might not get perfection, but it's about doing better and learning more.
And the stuff you're sharing is really awesome. I mean, it's not just applicable to air cash flow listings. This is applicable to all real estate. I mean, these are good tips for any type of real estate photography, whether you're doing a long-term rental or, you know, you're wholesaling a house or fixing and flipping a house. These photography tips are awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, and if you want a little bit more specifics, for our management company, we shoot on a 20 millimeter lens, and we shoot on a Canon 6D because it does really well with darker lighting, and we end up photographing a lot of basements. Basements are really big in our area. Not big. There's a lot of them. Most houses have a basement, but they're hard to light. So if you're like super techie, that's your little tidbit there. And that wraps up photography for us, and we will see you in module 15.